Welcome to Magnet Minutes. I'm Jordan Kimmel, and we have Jason Voss with us, an old friend and colleague. And Jason, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Jordan. Really appreciate you asking me on.
Well, Jason, you hit a triple crown with me. You're in a unique position. You're a former portfolio manager, CFA. You've made a nice addition and quote to our latest book, Invest in the Now, Mindfulness and Meditation. And in addition, you're now the CEO of your company, a new company. It's Deception and Truth Analysis. What a great name. And I want to hear all about the new company first to start. So why don't we start right there and tell me, I know you've been involved in trust and the whole concept behind language. So tell us exactly what deception and truth analysis is all about.
Sure. So thank you for the question. Deception and truth analysis was born of a deep curiosity I have had since the mid 1990s. When I began my career as a lowly research analyst, I recognized fairly early on at the fundamental investment shop that I worked at, we were really reliant on the statements that came from management's mouths about their future, their strategy, their competition, all kinds of crazy things. And I remember going to my portfolio manager at the time and I said, it seems like we really trust these people a lot. In graduate business school and in the CFA program, I thought it was all about reading accounting statements and whatever, but it looks like half of our process is down to this. What advice can you give me to assess, the quality of management based on this? He said, oh, it's very simple. Trust your gut. And that was the extent of the technology he handed to me mid 90s. When I retired from investment management about a decade later, that was still the best I had. And I always felt that that was an inadequate answer. And so when I then exited retirement to work at CFA Institute as its global director of content and for the benefit of members, I still had that felt pain like, oh my God, that's undiscovered territory for me as an investment professional and as an investment, like somebody who cares about the space. And CFA Institute, one of my jobs was if there isn't an interesting thinker or line of inquiry covered, but you think it's important for the investment process, here's budget to go research it. So I actually ended up working with criminal justice professionals and deception scientists to do history's first research on the
Wow.
deception detection capability as a finance pros. By the way, we're terrible. We're actually worse than the Gen Pop, and the Gen Pop is terrible. The Gen Pop is just 54% accurate at being able to discriminate between truthfulness, and deceptiveness. And finance pros are 51.8%. So even slightly worse. And we also have a strong truth bias. We guess we're being told the truth way more than we should, which means we're much more vulnerable to being deceived than we ought to. Anyway, those are the seeds of deception truth analysis. About 3 years ago, I got very serious about it because I told my wife, I'm like, in my consulting practice, I keep getting tapped for this deception detection bit. And I think I've had a couple $1 billion ideas in my life, and I think this is the one that's most fun for me. She said, go for it. You have to do it. You don't want to be on your deathbed and regret it. And so I was like, cool. And so I've been actively pursuing this now for about 3 years. We just went live in January. Took a while to develop everything.
Right. And so we're going to get into the meat more about what it is all about. What it is for me is, I'm more of a quant. We look at numbers. I'm one of the few portfolio managers that doesn't listen to the earnings calls. I believe that they're paid to promote, and you have to be able to see through that. And early on in this thing we called facts or the most trustworthy companies, I actually went to a seminar, webinar, and they talked about professional skepticism. And I never even heard those words before. And the idea that you would just trust somebody with a set of numbers and that they're accurate. Well, there's been a little bit of legislation making sure the CFO is not outright lying with numbers. But we know with earnings, there's so much manipulation permitted. So I know you're tuned into the language, and so tell us exactly, what you're listening for, what you're able to perceive, through the deception and truth analysis.
Sure. So a couple things. One, fascinating factoid that I now know based on our work, only 1.7% of financial documents, here I'm talking 10Ks, 10Qs, annual reports, quarterly reports, is made up of number. And that tends to be how most people try and solve for whether there's fraud or not. So said another way, most of our analytical techniques are absolutely invested and spent on this very narrow slice of information. The other thing about number is the numbers are outcomes driven by choices, those choices driven by behaviors, and yet there's not a lot of systematic analysis of the behaviors of management. We know from our own validation work, the market takes a long time to price fraud and to discover fraud. In some cases, years. And that's because they're waiting for the numbers to tell them a story that otherwise was present had they been looking at other bits. So that's the first thing. Second thing, in terms of what we're looking at, I'm not at liberty to say all of that because that's some of our secret sauce, but I
Okay.
can say we're going to do a fun exercise, Jordan. I'm going to have you engage me with that in just a second, just because the audience, I think, will get a kick out of it. What I can say is we're not using machine learning or artificial intelligence, which is frequently an assumption about how we solve this problem. Why aren't we doing that? We're not doing that for a couple of reasons. One, AI tends to be guilty of overfit, as does machine learning in different situations. So it works well with a data set, but then doesn't port well to another problem to be solved. And you
Okay.
end up with as many machine learning algorithms as you do contexts. And we were trying to eliminate that problem. The other thing about machine learning is it's statistical, but it's not scientific. And said another way, it's really good at identifying perhaps hidden correlations that were otherwise missing from traditional analyses. Yay, that's great.
Sure.
But if you have a science to rely upon first, why not start with the science? Like no physicist is relying upon machine learning to have a new view on quantum physics, at least not yet. Why? Because there's hundreds of years of physics science to rely upon. We do the same thing. We're relying upon more than 100 years of deception science, which is very carefully notice the behavioral differences between deceivers and truth tellers. We then use NLP to look for that stuff. And so, with your permission, Jordan, let's walk through an exercise, which is
Fascinating.
one of the more than 30 factors that we look at in our work. You game?
Okay.
You are?
I'm
Okay,
in.
cool.
I'm a little nervous. I hope I don't slip up here, but I'm all in.
Okay, okay. All right. So here's the little game we're going to play. Tell me from the time you woke up this morning to the time you fired up the podcast, what you've been doing. And you'll see me count off with my hands, two separate things. And at the end, I'll tell you what I've been counting.
Okay, so basically, I have a routine. I'm very routine oriented. What I'm doing is I'm a portfolio manager. So the first thing that I'm looking for is news on my companies. I'm looking at action in the portfolio once everything opens up. And other than that, walked my dog a couple times, had a nice breakfast, and did a pre-check for Fox. I'll do a little bit later, and that was my whole morning so far.
All right. So on the right hand, I'm counting the number of sentences you've expressed. On the other hand, I was counting the proportion or the number, sorry, of verbs that indicated your motion through space as well as temporality, meaning the time factor. Why? Because deception science has noted that people who are telling the truth tend to replay a memory of what's going on in their head, and they retell the movie in a chronological order. Deceivers tend to say stuff like, today's been like any other day, it's been a day, things of that nature with low detail. So if I have a sense of what's normal for a truth teller, I can make an inference based on that factor. And we look at more than 30. So that's an example and a freebie to the audience in terms of one of the ways you could tell if somebody's telling you the truth is, hey, what's your day been like? And if you suspect them of being deceptive, if they don't have a lot of motion verbs indicating I'm moving or temporality, that time has, they're moving through time, then you can make a conclusion higher than likely chance than not that they're being deceptive.
Interesting. Okay. And I've seen like NLP of looking to the left and looking to the right, memory versus, imagination. But I'm curious before we go on to the next thing, Jason, what I scored.
Well, yeah. So, and by that, I think you're actually well within one standard deviation of the mean, but a little low because you actually selected your narrative in almost like a bullet point fashion. You're like, my process is, and then you bullet pointed it. And so that put it all in the present tense. So the only temporality there was present, but then in the latter half of your narrative, you switched. We might have missed you there. We might have labeled you as deceptive. I don't think so though, because it wasn't extreme enough to have been properly labeled as deceptive. But
Right.
you're we've done this exercise, I don't know, 200 times. You're probably in the category of about 1 in 20 where your speaking style is slightly different than normal. But I still think you would have been measured as truthful.
Okay, well, that's what my morning looked like. But so let's move on a little bit.
Sure.
And you mentioned, one of the steps in your career was the CFA, which is where I met you.
Yep.
And what was really interesting is I'll let you share your books as well. But one of the things you talked about, uh, in addition to your really good performance, was this concept of using mindfulness and meditation to have the right uh, framework and the right mentality to do your work. And we appreciate you adding a quote in Invest in the Now. But talk for a minute about the importance of that in your entire life, and I'm sure that plays into what you're doing now with your new company.
Yeah, it really does. Like if I had, like if somebody said at the end of my life, hey, what was the secret of your success? And may I be so lucky that people care about my answer. Um, I would say something like my ability to know myself, right? And I know that the highest technology for knowing myself is meditation. It is a technique of relating to the world where you can hear yourself think, you can see yourself think. And if you get really good and really focused as a meditator, you can literally trace back the source of your thoughts. Why is that important in investing context? Well, behavioral bias has rightfully been identified as one of the damagers of alpha and investment performance, which is, I know, Jordan, why in your approach you try to be as quant as possible is to eliminate some of those behavioral biases.
Exactly.
So we need technique, we need technology to be able to check ourselves and to be able to hear ourselves think because of ongoing evaluation of the world around us. But then additionally, if we've screwed up, and we all eventually do screw up, the only real way to learn from that is we have to be honest with ourselves. And I know that as a meditator, I'm much more comfortable in my own skin and I can face and confront my deficiencies, which means I can work on them. Two, I now can work on those problems and get better. And so for me, I think of like Ray Dalio thought. There's a gentleman named Ung Kok Song. He set up the government of the Singapore Investment Corporation, which is their sovereign wealth fund. Lots of A-list investors have recognized that meditation is one of their top secret weapons, and I'm no different. I think it's one of the things that gives you edge. Not only that, but it leads to greater joyfulness and happiness as a human being, which I think is a really wonderful byproduct.
Right. And you know what I hear from people a lot of times in discussion is I'm so busy, I'm so busy. And the thing is you create your own schedule, and being too busy to enjoy life, too busy to make time for what's important to you is a curse. And we can only spin so many plates effectively. I actually believe in relaxation. I probably uh who need to invest in the now with Trisha Bowman and Ritika because probably need a little bit more relaxation, and it's something that we learn to do, and I'm enjoying the whole process, and so I want to kind of square it back now to the investing side and bringing in your company. And so with deception and truth analysis, you mentioned, I'm not asking for secret sauce here, but what I'm curious about is do you create a 1 to 5 score? Do you isolate bad guys and most fall into the middle? If I was to use your process, and I'm more of a quant, as we mentioned, and it served me well over all these years, but I want to always add another level of detail. So if I was to try to do it in the investment, do you provide scores? Do you identify outliers in terms of really bad deception? how would I use it? How does an investment manager maybe, use your company's data?
Sure, and thank you for the question, Jordan. So the short answer is our primary output is what we call a data score, deception truth analysis score. And it ranges between minus 100% and plus 100%. Any negative score indicates a level of deceptiveness, any positive score, a level of truthfulness. Extreme scores are very hard to get. We're basically normally distributed. So if you know the normal distribution, 68% of scores are within plus or minus one standard deviation from the mean, 95% two standard deviations within the mean, 99 3. We're slightly different. We skew slightly positive. The average score for us is 4.9%. But if you adjust for that mean, then our scores are roughly normally distributed. And so extreme scores are really tough. So if you're a quant manager, there are lots of ways you could use our scores. One, to establish your fishing pond, like, what's my universe of possibilities? So one of our clients is using data scores to say, hey, anybody who scores as deceptive, and specifically, I think they're saying greater than more than one standard deviation deceptive, they're never getting in our fishing pond. And so that way they're confident that they've reduced significantly the fraud probability of anything that they would then choose to look at via other factors. We also have quant hedge fund managers who are looking at the data score because it turns out they are predictive, both on the truthful side and on the deceptive side, of future returns. So they're looking at whatever they're looking at. Their decision rules are their decision rules, but they're looking at that. But then for a fundamental investor, we also are able to drill into an individual document and show the running narrative of deceptiveness and truthfulness through that document. And at a glance or with a click, you can click on the most deceptive sections of the document and see the underlying language which has triggered the score. And so for fundamental folks, and I think this is probably for that community, how they're going to use it the most, they like it because now they can evaluate every single company in their universe, right? Now you can run
Okay.
every K through it. You don't have to make choices about, oh, I only have time for, going back to time.
Right.
I could only do this. And now I can sharpen my question set of management because I now know the issues where new levels of deception are occurring and new issues. And now when I call up the IR person, investor relations person, I can say, hey, I really need to ask them about this segment because this
Right.
business segment they're being highly deceptive about.
Right. Well, what you're saying, Jason, makes a lot of sense to me. I'm intrigued enough to want to actually see it.
Sure.
And what I do, as with the magnet, is I'm really not interested in that whole 68% up the middle.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the tails and the most and the least, and like the short, the least trustworthy. And our fax model has held up now 11 years of beautiful performance, all quantitative. But if we can add to that another level, um, always want to improve, always want to get better. And in the last couple of minutes, Jason, we covered a lot. You really do hit this unique triple crown for me of someone who's managed money, really in tune with the mind, in tune with trust and truthfulness. Is there anything I left out? Anything you want to kind of summarize and bring us to close?
Not really. I mean, one of the things I'm going to compliment you for your audience. One of the things I've always appreciated about you, as well as Barbara, your wife, is the emphasis on integrity. And in my experience, integrity creates an attractor point. And I hate to get weird and touchy-feely about it, but those who have integrity tend to have better lives for lots of reasons. They're happier, they're more joyful. But in my experience, the investment managers I know who have the highest levels of integrity tend to perform the best as well. And I'm not sure why, but one of the things I've always admired about you, Jordan, is your grounding in integrity and your fascination, curiosity with how do I improve my integrity? How do I improve the integrity of the world? How do I improve the integrity of the investment business? And one of the reasons why I think we've always, had a connection is because of that grounding in mutually, and I hope shared integrity.
Well, I really appreciate that. And what happens is if you kind of go by a certain routine, and I am pretty disciplined, but if you're not looking over your shoulder and you could figure out how you've come to conclusions, and one of the things we like to say is the first time people make mistakes all the time. The first time someone tries to deceive you, is the end of the relationship. It keeps things nice and easy. And with public companies, there's so much room for earnings manipulation. I'm really curious. So that's not outright lying, but I'm really fascinated. I'm going to follow up with you to see how your actual scores. I love the acronym comes out as data.
Yeah.
And so it's deception and truth analysis. It's Jason Voss, a good friend, someone I'm going to actually look forward to seeing your data. And I really appreciate you joining us on Magda Minutes today.
Cool, Jordan. Thanks for being one of the keepers of the faith, my friend.
All right. Well, thanks again. Once again, it's Jordan Kimmel signing off for Magda Minutes, and we'll see you soon. Thanks again.